Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, your weekly source for encouraging and equipping local church leaders, with your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark sit down with church leaders that you should know. We believe these honest conversations will be helpful and encouraging to you as you lead the local church. Here is this week's episode.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Church Leadership Podcast. We're so thankful that you've joined us for today's conversation, and it is going to be an awesome one. Before we get there, though, this conversation, I want to remind you, our mission here at Church Leadership Podcast is to encourage and equip you to lead in the local church. And we believe every conversation that Andy and I have and that we bring to you with other people really does just that. And we'd encourage you to subscribe. I know for me, I don't really listen or watch podcasts if I'm not subscribed to them. So if you're watching on YouTube, just hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on your favorite app, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And it is a joy for Andy and I really to bring this to you every week. And we've said this before, but we probably are encouraged and equipped a lot more than you are. And that's why we keep doing this. But we want to certainly make sure that we're doing that for everybody watching and listening. So without further ado, Andy, let's get to today's conversation.
Well, on this week's episode of the podcast, we are thrilled to have our friend Thomas Fletcher. Thomas serves in Livingston, Alabama. He serves there at First Baptist Church of Livingston as the senior pastor. And he is also a chaplain in the Alabama National Guard. And we're going to kind of dig into both of those worlds a little bit with you, Thomas. And we're glad that you've taken time out of your schedule to join us this week on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, obviously, if people are watching this on YouTube, at least they see you are in full uniform today, and we're going to get into a little bit of that and kind of how that happens in your life and really what God has done through that area of your ministry. But a lot of people watching and listening probably don't know you or haven't met you. And so we just met you a few months ago, and we're intrigued by, how God's used you and the unique story that you have. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your story and who you are and really how God has gotten you where you are now.
All right. Well, so got saved at a young age, loved the church, loved growing up in the church, but also really loved military. Dad was in the Army Reserves, and he'd come home and I'd go to war today, Dad, or something silly like that. But so I always had a love for the military, but as I grew up, really just had a passion for a local church, had some great mentors there, what is now Grace Life. Ended up just asking God where he wanted me to go to college. I figured college was the next step, and got good stories, led me to University of Mobile, loved it there. Ended up interning some after some denials, and kind of mentored through internships, surrendered to the ministry. And kind of the itch, military never went away, but I thought it was gone. And we had I think a chaplain come and talk to our school about being a chaplain. And I was pretty much already slotted to go to New Orleans. And I thought maybe I'll do that, but probably not. And I actually kind of want to talk about this as part of the story of why I became a chaplain. And I was talking to my cousin who had already been deployed to Iraq. And he was saying, "Hey man, why don't you be a chaplain?" And I said, "No, I don't want to be a chaplain, because you think chaplain, you think Father Mulcahy, you think just handing out some candy. Nobody wants to hang out with the chaplain." And he's like, "Man, the chaplains are great." And I said, "Why don't you just bring your problems to the psychology person or whatever?" I didn't know what they were called. And he said, "Well, I mean, they're helpful, but I mean, that's more on the serious level. And a lot of times they have to write down what you say." Army has what's called confidentiality, and with the chaplain, like literally like a court martial, I don't have to testify. So anything somebody tells me as a religious advisor, like it's confidential for life, even if they're guilty of anything. And some people have a problem with that, but it really lets them in a very rank and structure setting. It's very unique in all of society. So anyways, I said, "Yeah, so who cares?" And he said, "No, I was deployed in Iraq, and I literally saw a chaplain save one of my soldiers' lives and kind of listener discretion advised or whatever. But if you have kids listening, but basically this guy, one of his soldiers went back home halfway through his his tour and was with his wife and everything, and came back. And by the time he came back after a week or two, he had an STD, and he was ready to take his life. He was ready to kill himself. Nothing's worth anything. And they somehow got him to talk to the chaplain, and they literally saved his life. And that really marked me. And so then I wanted to be a chaplain, but I also wanted to do ministry. I thought I'd be a youth minister. I went to New Orleans, eventually became a chaplain candidate, which is basically like an intern in the either reserves or National Guard. I love the National Guard. God ended up bringing me through that. And so while I was in seminary, also being in the Guard, then became a pastor in Baton Rouge and was chaplain there in Louisiana National Guard. And then God called me back to Alabama in Livingston, which I love, college town. And then I also get to be a chaplain in Florence. So I get to be a pastor through the week. 1 weekend a month, I'm a chaplain, really just pastoring, loving people.
That's a great story, man. Thomas, you and I met a few years ago. I got to come down to your church there in Livingston, and it was neat to see you interact with your people. And in the context you're in, a lot of people who are leading in the church are probably in a very similar context that you are serving in your area. Maybe there aren't that many chaplains, but there's a whole lot of people serving in small areas, rural to rural/suburban areas. And you're located near a university there. So tell us a little bit about your context serving there in small town Alabama and how that works out, because I see a lot of similarities in chaplaincy as I do serving in a local church in the area like you are.
Okay, so yes and no. There's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. Chaplains don't deal with deacons. And deacons can be the best or the toughest. So really you're just more of, and that's what's the difference between a chapel and a church. And that's something I ask my deacons a lot in our church. And that, so Livingston is a small town, but it's also a college town. And it's also within the Black Belt, which is a unique part of Alabama with some beauty and some struggle, both economically, racially, historically, and even discipleship wise is just some unique things there. So, being just a local pastor, loving the people, especially in a small town, First Baptist Church, just loving the people, being patient. I call it cultivating an oak grove, a tree of oak trees. It's not squash plants and a lot of times the seeds you're planting and the cultivation and even the rescue that you do will not take effect for years or decades later. And so you just invest in the slow and strong. Usually these First Baptist churches, I think ours is 187 years old. You're not going to turn that in 5 years even. I mean, you're just really going to have to invest and trust God with the dividends. So just investing in that. The college makes our town really unique. College students are a tobacco crop, I say, they rent, they buy, they eat. And so we've had a really awesome college ministry. We've dealt with some just super amount of passion. We've had 14 college students show some kind of call to ministry in the past 4 years. But I also call them my bucking Broncos because college students know everything. And I knew them too. But then when you mix it in with their tobacco crop, we don't want to do anything to slow them down. There's some lack of accountability there. And if your church hasn't been discipled, which I've literally had a deacon say, discipleship has never been a big deal for our church, then you're going to run into some issues with leading young ministers, even just reaching young families and younger men, because we live in an age where if your church does not disciple, your church is dying. So
that's right.
So there are some similarities, but there's some differences. Now in chaplaincy, it is like pastoring a small town. There's 400 or 500 people in my unit. But it's also different because you get the respect of a minister in some ways, but also your job is just to love people and to meet them where they are. So one of the things that's interesting about being a chaplain is you perform or provide. I perform as a Southern Baptist. I'm endorsed by NAM, but I don't, but I'm not a Muslim. So I don't do Muslim prayers or Muslim prayer rugs, but I have to provide for those Muslims, their religious freedom, their religious support. I provide their religious support. So they need imam, if they need prayer rug, they need a prayer time. Same thing with things that are different for me, like Mormons. Maybe they need a Book of Mormon. So I provide that. And you have to have this certain amount of trust in the gospel that God's truth is the loudest. So I'm going to show them the love and respect, and hopefully they'll come. I've got one guy I'm praying through. He's a former Wiccan, and I think we're getting him closer and closer to Christ and baptism. But it's a lot of patience as well, because you're dealing with people who are not just lost, but rarely ever had the truth clearly presented to them. So you just have to love them through it.
Dude, that's good, man. That's good. And I'm debating. I've got about 15 questions now that I want to ask, but so I guess, for people watching and listening, I don't know how many chaplains we have. I know we have other people serving in the military who are part of our church leadership podcast family. But
I still know why you didn't ask them. Like, I even suggested one or two guys. You're like, nah. Okay.
Well, because I believe God's using you in a unique way. And in fact, the next question I want to ask is, it's also relatable, not just to those who are serving in the military. I think it's any person who's co-vocational or bivocational, or, dealing with, two different worlds in a sense. How, I guess I've got a double part question here. What are some ways that you've seen it as an advantage serving as a chaplain and as a pastor? And then what are some unique challenges you've faced in those two roles, serving at the same time?
Benefits are easier, and I really think it's a greater benefit overall. There are some challenges. Learned a lot about leadership through the military. And a lot of people think, it's actually a great myth in my life, that people think I'm actually tougher and more directive or aggressive, depending on how you're talking about it, because of the military. I'm actually a lot softer because of the chaplaincy. And but it's funny because people think, oh, you're like that because of the military. Not really. You have to ask people who knew me before. But I've learned a lot about leadership, because really, even in the military, you have rank and structure, but you have to find a way to inspire people. You have to find a way to inspire it. So funerals, even some of I practiced funerals in the Army before I ever did a funeral as a pastor. And so just and learning rehearsal to make things smooth, that taught me a lot. And how to counsel people, I learned more from the military than even seminary. A lot of positives, and even just keeping my foot in the real world, because soldiers will tell me things that church people would never even tell, or not even church people, that a lost person would never even tell a church person, much less a local pastor. And so there's a lot of head scratching situations out there, but I can kind of got a taste of the culture and just how desperate people are, how lost they are. And just, man, they really are sheep without a shepherd. Now, the struggles would include just time management, and literally the accountability to my church, and also the accountability to my commander. I literally have two bosses. I don't want to necessarily say that the deacons are my boss, but the church, I have an accountability to God in that church. But also, I have to do what the commander says in that unit legally. Like, he can tell me to do something. So just learning to work, so sometimes I'm gone from my church more than I'd like. I have it worked out right now where I'm like a Friday and Saturday most drills, but this past drill wasn't. I've got a budget time. Learning how to say no to both and yes to my family is a big deal. My wife would tell you that I have struggled with that a lot, and I've gotten better, but just learning to say no, that your family really does come first. Learning to communicate what's going on with both sides. And it's hard in ministry because you want to brag. Well, I was doing this funeral, so I couldn't show up. But you do have to find a way to communicate, and then also ask, what could I do better? Be flexible. Hopefully it means less of me and more of the Lord through me. And not that I love the titles, but I love the service. So there's some challenges and misconceptions on both sides. People think I do this as a pastor. People think I'm tougher or more of a jerk because of the chaplaincy. It's actually not true. It's really just I'm naturally not a nice person. God has to bring kindness through me.
Well, I've been around you enough, Thomas, to say I think you're a nice guy, man. I do. I genuinely see the Lord at work in and through you. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just shared with trying to really have a foot in both worlds is not easy for anybody, especially somebody serving in ministry who's trying to carry out and be proficient in what you're doing, which is definitely hard. But you hammered on something I think that is very, very important, and that is saying no to other things so you can say yes to your family. Tell us a little bit about, now you don't have to tell us your spouse's name and age or your anything like that, but I'm just saying, tell us a little bit about your family dynamics and how that works out, because I'm sure a lot of people right now are struggling with how to deal with the pandemic and serve in the local church, much less how to serve in the midst of a pandemic while being a chaplain in the armed forces and serving in the local church and managing your family. Tell us how you manage that, or or maybe how that's difficult too.
I think mismanaged might be the better word. But my advice would be a triage of priority. Like my phone's always on, but at the same time, I don't answer every phone call. So, and I tell people if it's an emergency, you need to call 2 or 3 times and leave a message. Especially because, I mean, I can get a midnight call from a soldier who wants to kill himself. And literally, I mean, I've made that promise. Anything you tell me, I'm not going to tell anyone else. And literally they'll start the conversation with that. Say, if I tell you, you're not going to tell anyone else, right? I said, I'll say no, but I'm really going to want you to if this happened. They said, well, I'm going to talk to you, but and just me and that soldier knew about their suicide thoughts. I hate that. I can't share it, but I love that they feel comfortable and that there's that trust. So what's the priority? If somebody's just calling, especially around 6 or 7 when I'm eating dinner, I'm not even going to look at my phone. Like, I'm not even going to look to see who's calling. Like, the only time I look to see who's calling, no matter what, is when I'm not with my wife. Because if she calls, I need to say, oh, this is, and I'll tell you her name. It'll cost me though. It's Bethany. I also have to pay if I mention my wife's name in an illustration. Like, it's $100. Some people know that, and they'll see me say her name and I wince, and they start laughing because they know, oh, he just bought a brand new pair of shoes right there. Just trying and just understanding. And my church is so understanding of this, that my wife makes incredible sacrifices. We don't have kids yet. We're trying to adopt. We want to have our own kids. And for whatever reason, God's timing hasn't set that up yet. But, we've had family situations. And so I'll just take off. My church is very loving and understanding as far as time. I was up here at the church till 8:30 last night. So that means I might not be in right at 8:30 or 9 this morning. I might be late, but it's about taking care of the responsibilities, I think, and it just communicating to the deacon, to the people that hold you accountable, kind of what you're doing, and asking them their input. But as far as, and so my wife, I'm asking her, like, what do you want me to let go of? Or a lot of times she's giving the suggestions, like, is that really where all your time needs to be? Just listening. And again, I'm a mismanager at this. What my advice is and what would be better is just listening to what they want, especially my wife, like, and making sure. I had a professor who told me one time his wife had to call the church to get an appointment with him. That's terrifying.
That's scary.
Terrifying. And he was so embarrassed. But she was right. She made a point.
Wow.
Don't let it get to that. If she calls, how are you going to take care of her? You get ahead on stuff. If somebody needs to talk to you, but you were supposed to be with your wife that night, you just say, I already have an appointment. I'm booked. And you block off that time.
That's good.
So, managing priorities, and it's like a triage of, because there are some desperate situations. And my wife will say that. She's like, all right, how bad? And I'm like, this and this. She's like, okay, I get it. But other times it's like, what do they want? I said, nothing. I'm not answering that call. I'll talk to them tomorrow. Like, what can wait? What can wait till tomorrow, till next week? What can wait an hour? Like, let's say somebody does call me and there's an emergency I kind of pretend like I'm in the mafia, and like my wife doesn't know about it. I go to the bathroom at the restaurant. I call them real quick. Hey, what's up? Okay. Hey, well, I'll talk to you tomorrow. We're good. Person doesn't know I'm in the bathroom. We're all good. I come back. All my wife knows is I wash my hands. We're good. I mean, just how do I protect her? What are the boundaries from some of that? She doesn't need to know all the time somebody's struggling. And it's not every week or every day or even every month that I deal with some of these suicide and divorce, those kind of things. But she's got her own life. 5th grade teaching in a pandemic is hard. We've got our own family struggles. Does she really need all the church and chaplain struggles? No. So don't tell her everything. And I've learned that the hard. I've mismanaged it.
All of that is incredible wisdom and advice, not just for those serving as a chaplain or in the military, or even bivocationally or co-vocationally. That's just incredible advice for any leader in the church, whether you're a lay leader, whether you're a staff member, a pastor. That's huge. And I think we lose track of that so often. We think, and I'm just going to preach a little bit, we think that we've got to take care of this situation because it hinges on us and only we can do this. Well, that's insane. That's not a healthy view of leadership and ministry at all. God can take care of that with or without us. And, he's given us as Andy says all the time, the small church within our household to pastor first. And that's our priorities. That's fantastic, Thomas. We appreciate you saying that. And really, maybe a big takeaway for me is if I ever call you, I'm just going to assume that you're in the bathroom. So,
and you can tell him whatever you want in confidence. And you committed a crime, he can't say anything about it.
So,
just soldiers.
You're not protected.
Well, there goes my plan for calling you after the.
Okay, you can flush now, Thomas. See you later.
Yeah,
I'll keep it within reason, but if it's illegal, then I have to report it. But I'm literally saying in the guard, like, you can tell me illegal activity, and I don't.
And I'm sure you've heard some doohoozies too.
I'm sure you have. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I've got a really. So.
Well, so we normally close out the podcast with a word of encouragement. I think you kind of challenge and encourage us there, but maybe for someone listening who is struggling with time management or priorities, or even pastoring in a pandemic, or maybe balancing their ministry and life and all that kind of stuff. Maybe what's something you can share that you've learned to encourage them to keep on trying and to keep on serving, but also loving their family and their church and whatever ministry they're involved in.
I've got several things, but I would start and focus on 1 Thessalonians 5:24. It says, faithful is he who calls you. He will do it. If he's called you, and trust me, I'm unique is the nice way. I'm a weird, whatever. And I struggle. I've got ADHD. I struggle with, like some people call it being direct. Some people call it aggressive. But he's called me. He's called me to be pastor here. He's called me to be chaplain. And, Brooks said, preaching is truth through personality. And I would say pastoring and discipling is truth through presence. Just be there. Be yourself. Be full of the Spirit. We had one situation in chaplain school. Somebody was asking about if somebody confesses, not that they've been raped, but they're the rapist. What do? Do you go and get justice for the rape victim? Like, how do you handle that? And this chaplain, she said, pastor the moment you have. So you take care of the rapist in front of you, which is just so gut-wrenching. That's chaplaincy. You're gonna have some gut-wrenching moments. But I would also say church growth is just disciple the moment you have. You don't have everything. Look at Philip and the eunuch. He didn't have all day. The eunuch said, what prevents me from being baptized? And shockingly, the Spirit takes him away as soon as the guy's baptized. We need to have a 2 or 3 year discipleship program with this guy like Jesus did. No, just follow and be faithful with the moment you have. Be faithful with your call. That'd be the other last thing I'd say. I got a lot to say, but Jeremiah didn't have a single convert. Maybe Baruch. Okay. He ended up influencing Daniel and I think Ezra, some others. But success in ministry is defined by faithfulness. Well done, good and faithful service. Just be yourself, be in the Lord, and be there, and let God work through you.
That's good. That is so good. Man, that's awesome.
Well, man, I'm thankful for your faithfulness, Thomas. We appreciate you and all you do to serve in the local church and to serve those in the military. We know God has put you there and uses you. And I appreciate you very much. And I know we have common friends and we get to kind of interact with all that, but just knowing how God has taken you through this track and how you have totally embraced this life instead of pushing back against one or the other. And you've just embraced it. And we're thankful for you. And there's so many people out there who are watching and listening, and so many people who aren't, who, man, they needed to hear what you had to say today, especially at the end, to hear you say those words: success is not defined by results that we normally think are these tangible things, but it's just simply being faithful. So we appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Dude, thank you guys. It's an honor and a pleasure.
And for the rest of you, thank you so much for joining this conversation too. And we'll see you next time.
God bless you guys.